Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of the Daily Gwei Refuel, where I recap the latest news in the Ethereum ecosystem. I'm your host, Anthony Sassano, and today's the 18th of September, 2023. Alright everyone, let's get into it. So actually, before we get into it today, I just wanted to give a quick friendly reminder that there will be no refuel for Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday this week. Of course, I will be back next Monday with an extra long episode to make up for all of that, but yeah, tomorrow will be the last refuel before there's no refuels for the rest of the week. And as I mentioned last week as well, the episode with Eric that was going to go out on Saturday, as per the normal schedule, will now be pushed to next week as well. But yeah, you know, it's funny, I mentioned this last week, but I can just tell that something's going to happen on Wednesday, Thursday, or Friday, something big, and then I'm going to have to wait till Monday to cover it, and I'll get FOMO as well. Like, I know you guys sometimes say to me, you really miss it when I miss an episode, especially if it's like a few in a row. Believe me, I miss it more than you guys do, because I just love covering the news, love covering what happens. And whenever I see something on kind of like Twitter or see something happen in the ecosystem, and then I have to wait like the whole day until I can put the refuel out to cover it, I get like a bit of FOMO. I'm like, oh my god, I really want to talk about it, right? So yeah, it's just as bad for me as it is for you guys. But yeah, just wanted to give a friendly reminder there that Wednesday, Thursday, Friday this week, there will be no refuel, but I will definitely be back tomorrow. And of course, I'm here today. So let's start off with the news. So I mentioned, I think it was last week or the week before, the new Geth version came out, version 1.13.0. And I did mention at the time that I didn't think people should rush to upgrade their Geth versions because there could be potential for bugs since it was such a major new version. And of course, there was a bug. So the Go Ethereum or Geth Twitter account tweeted this out over the weekend. I think this was yesterday, where they said, we've identified an issue in Geth version 1.13, which rejects withdrawals from blocks, i.e. produces bad blocks, doesn't produce blocks when mining. I think that was supposed to say staking here, obviously. The issue was fixed on our master branch, and we'll also prep a release later today. And they did, of course, release hotfix. So if you are running Geth, you can go upgrade to this hotfix and it'll fix the issue. But the issue was basically that if you were running Geth, you weren't able to produce local blocks. So you would produce blocks passed to you via the MEV-boost network, but if you were not using MEV-boost, or if you were producing local blocks for any other reason, then you basically wouldn't be, you'd be missing that proposal of the blocks there. So a pretty major bug, I think. But the thing is that if you look at the amount of blocks that are being built locally, it's only 7% of the network, as 93% of the network is opted into MEV-boost. So it didn't really affect the network too badly, and the fix was out like pretty fast here. There's one consensus layer client that actually acted a bit funny around this, because and that's Prism. So what Prism does, even though it gets blocks from MEV-boost, what happens is that it will not propose a block because of the fact that it checks against a local block first. It checks if they can build it more profitably locally first, and if it can, it'll build it locally instead of through MEV-boost. But yeah, I think that, and because of that, I think if you were running a Prism Geth combo, then you wouldn't be producing blocks at all, even if it was coming from MEV-boost, I think. But the issue is fixed now, so that's all well and good. But once again, this shows us the importance of client diversity, guys. Like, you know, Geth is the majority execution layer client still, I think, and Geth is considered the most kind of like stable and the most reliable execution client, but it can still have bugs, especially around these new major releases. And I think I mentioned this at the time, saying that it was such a big release that the likelihood for bugs is so high, but because it was only a client release and it wasn't a release that had a hard fork in it, or like something like Denkun, for example, you had the optionality. You did not need to upgrade to this new client. There was no rush to do it if you were using Geth. I hadn't updated my Geth. I have an archive node that I'm running. That's a Geth archive node. I didn't update that yet, but I have now to this new version here. But yeah, that's why I'm never really in a rush to update, unless it's a required update, like for a hard fork or something like that. Like with the upcoming Denkun upgrade, of course, I'm going to have to upgrade my my clients if I want to be on the Denkun fork. Otherwise, I'm going to basically fork off the chain and go into my own little world, which won't be very fun. But yeah, so I just wanted to explain what happened there. And as I said, if you are running Geth, be sure to upgrade to the newest version 1.13.1 with the hotfix. It's live on GitHub, and I'll link it in the YouTube description below for you to check out. All right, as I mentioned last week, the anniversary of the merge was on the 15th of September, and to celebrate, Danning here, who works at Flashbots, put together a report to provide a timeline view of how rapid the space has evolved over the past year, covering notable events and behaviors and in the MEV supply chain. So MEV has grown considerably since the merge, and it's funny because the timing was basically perfect for MEV-boost, because MEV-boost existed before the merge, and I believe that some people were using it before the merge. But then as soon as the merge happened, MEV-boost uptake skyrocketed basically, and more people used it. And now we're at the point where, as I said, 97% of all blocks are going through the MEV-boost network, or 93% of all blocks are proposed by the built by the MEV-boost network here. And you can see all the relevant data and stats. It's actually quite a detailed post here if you want to go and look through the history. I'll link it in the YouTube description below. But yeah, this is what's super interesting, because if you listen to the podcast, I think I mentioned it the other day on Uncommon Core with a few of the people talking about PBS like Mike Nuda and MEV-boost and all that, you'll actually get an insight into why Flashbots built MEV-boost, and how they saw that this was coming, and how they've always believed that it was a temporary solution until we got in-protocol kind of enshrining of PBS, but that stuff's still quite far away. So until that comes, most of the network is still going to use MEV-boost because it's the economically sound thing to do to build blocks, because it's way more profitable, obviously. And of course, when you're a staking provider, especially like a staking pool, you have to use MEV-boost, or else your yield is going to be significantly less than the rest of the network. So you're kind of like forced into it, even if you don't want to use it for whatever other reason there. But anyway, enough on that. You can go check out this post for yourself. I'll link it in the YouTube description below. But yeah, the funny thing is, I'm really excited about PBS and what it means for the network, and getting rid of the relayers specifically, because the relayers are those centralized points of failure. Because I've said before that the builders being centralized is okay, as long as we also get something like censorship resistant lists or inclusion lists, where we can guarantee that it's basically a near 0% chance that any of these builders are going to engage in any form of censorship. But also at the same time, the builder being, I guess like the building of blocks being concentrated into maybe 5 or 10 entities at most, building the majority of the blocks, isn't actually too big of a deal there. Whereas when it comes, because it's a profit game. Whereas when it comes to the relayers, traditionally the MEV-boost relayers don't actually make much money. There's not really a business model there for them, and any fees that they would take would just basically make them lose their market share, right? So the relayer business is not a good business to be in, and that means that it will probably centralize over time. I know we've got a bunch of relayers live now, but in the long term, how many of those will still be around? How many of those will just be live? I know, maybe Ultrasound Money sticks around, because that's definitely one that is more kind of like altruistic and more ideological. But the others that are just there for pure business reasons, maybe they're not there, right? Maybe they don't want to run the relay anymore because it's too expensive, it's too cumbersome. Maybe they can't, because regulators come to them and say you're not allowed to run a relayer at all for some reason, right? So we want to get rid of the relayers, which is what PBS aims to do. And then on top of PBS, we obviously want to do some things around the censorship resistance and making sure that we can essentially make it near 0% chance that any of the builders want to or kind of like are economically incentivized to not censor there. But anyway, as I said, you can go check out this post. We'll link it in the YouTube description below. But I think talking about censorship resistance as well, Tim Biko put out an announcement over the weekend that Devconnect, or Devconnect, the Devconnect conference run by the Ethereum Foundation, will host the first edition of Censorship.wtf, which is a full day dedicated to exploring censorship resistance across the entire Ethereum stack, from the mempool to front ends. And the applications are open now for both speakers and general attendees. This looks like it would be a really interesting day to attend. As you guys know, I'm not actually going to Devconnect, but if I was, I would 100% be attending this event. I don't think, as Tim Biko said, I don't think there's ever been something like this, a full day dedicated to censorship and censorship resistance at a conference. So this is happening Saturday, November 18th at Devconnect. You can apply here. I'll link it in the YouTube description below. But yeah, as Tim mentioned, this is going to be discussing all things censorship on the network. And I think the timing of this couldn't be better. As I said, like, work is ramping up on things like PBS and inclusion lists and just making sure that we can make Ethereum even more censorship resistant than it already is. Obviously, since the OFAC sanctions just over a year ago on Tornado Cash, censorship has been a really big topic of discussion within the Ethereum community. But I think for a lot of us, we felt generally quite helpless because when it comes to MEV-boost and the relay network, there's not much we can do as individuals. Like, if you're running a validator, whether that's as a solo validator or running it as a rocket pool node operator, you can of course choose not to talk to these censoring relays and just talk to the non-censoring ones. But it brings all this subjectivity into it, right? And it brings legal risks into it too for US-based persons and citizens. So I totally understand why, it's been a hot topic of discussion, but it's also been something that people have felt helpless to kind of change. So I think that's what one of the goals here of this event is to basically bring people together and show them that they do have the power to affect change, not only at the protocol level with the MEV-boost relay stuff, but also with things like front ends. Like, front ends was another big thing where essentially the SEC and other regulatory bodies are now ordering the teams that host the front ends to censor certain tokens from those front ends, right? And we all know that on Uniswap's front end, if a token's being censored on there, it doesn't ultimately matter because you can use another front end or you can just directly talk to the contract because the Uniswap smart contracts are decentralized and they can't be censored the same way a front end can. They can technically be censored if, for example, the entire network was censoring it for some reason, right? As we saw with Tornado Cash, where, what is it, like 70% of the network, 35% of the network is censoring those transactions right now because of the relayers. But if you're talking about like front ends and having decentralized front ends, that's another big topic of discussion. And that's not something that I think is talked about enough, especially because these teams should be motivated to decentralize the front end, but I understand, or the front end that they run, but I understand why they don't, because for a lot of these teams, it's actually a profit center for them. So for them, it's basically, well, we want to make money off of people coming to and using our front ends, so we don't want to necessarily decentralize it because then we can't actually get the money from it. So for example, MetaMask, right? MetaMask has their swaps feature on MetaMask swaps. Now, if they were ordered to censor certain tokens on there, they would have to comply with that because they're a US-based company. But then I don't think they're going to decentralize that feature out because they take a massive fee from that. I think they take 0.8% off of every swap. They're not going to want to give that up. So there is a kind of, I guess, like meeting between profit incentives and the need for censorship resistance and for decentralized front ends. And I think that's all the stuff that's going to get hashed out at this event and then beyond this event. But really, at the end of the day, if the smart contracts are on Ethereum, even if they're not decentralized, anyone can build a front end on top of them, right? And people have. And it's not just front ends that are dedicated to the actual app itself. There's front ends like Zerion and Zappa that are generalized and can talk to many different protocols, and something like DeFi Saver and things like that. So really, it's just increasing choice for users. And that's really what it's always been about to me, where it's been, I accept the reality that there's going to be centralized front ends, there's going to be decentralized front ends, there's going to be centralized smart contracts, and there's going to be decentralized smart contracts. But as I said, even with the centralized smart contracts, you can still build on top of them. Yes, it may change in the future where for some reason you won't be able to build on top of it anymore, or it just isn't worth it because if the parties that are controlling the contracts have unilateral control over it and they change it and then your users get screwed over, then obviously that's not good. But for things like Uniswap, where it is actually truly decentralized, there are so many front ends for it right now. But I understand that for the everyday user as well, they may only want to go to Uniswap's front end and only trust Uniswap's front end, because that's another big thing with these front ends, is that if there's no way to curate which ones are trustworthy, anyone can build one and then look like they're talking to the Uniswap contracts, but in reality they're talking to some other contract that if you approve the token allowance for, it'll just drain you. So there is definitely a security aspect to this as well. But yeah, anyway, you can go check out the event details. I'll link them in the YouTube description below for you to do so. All right, so I mentioned last week that the Holesky testnet was launching on September 15th. Well, unfortunately, we had a failure to launch. Now, this was not a failure due to any underlying kind of issue with too many validators or anything like that being on the network. It was a simple misconfiguration error in the extra data field, which was applied to the execution layer configurations, but not the consensus layer ones, which means that the Holesky testnet did not initialize properly, and there was no genesis, I think. So then the tweet here from Nethermind continues and says a consensus has been reached among the EF DevOps and client teams to relaunch a week from now. I think that may have been changed to the 28th. I haven't actually seen any updates on this recently. Originally, they wanted to launch it on the 22nd of September, but it may be pushed out to the 28th. So either 22nd or 28th is when they're going to aim to launch it again. But thankfully, yeah, it failed to launch just based on something stupid, honestly. Like, if I'm being honest, this should have been caught in the testing that they did before they actually went ahead with going for a mainnet launch here. And it's obviously a learning lesson for them. But this is a testnet, right? Like, it's not a huge deal that this didn't happen. It's not like it's a mainnet fork or anything like that. But still, kind of a funny little thing that happened here. But as I said, it is aiming to relaunch on the 22nd and 28th with the exact same specs that it was going to launch with on the 15th, which was those 1.5 million validators that I talked about, because they want to stress test the network. And some people ask me, does this have any impact on Dencun timing for like mainnet? And I initially said no, and I kind of still think it is no, but it kind of may have a second order impact on it, where you guys know that the typical kind of, release schedule for these kind of network upgrades is that they'll do the DevNets first, of which they've been doing them for, a few months now. They're out to like DevNet 9, and then DevNet 10, I think. And then they'll do the testnets, and they'll schedule those, and then they'll do mainnet. So I think at this rate, like, because we're already in mid-September or just after mid-September, Dencun may get pushed out to December now. It may not happen in November anymore. And as I've always said to you guys, this was just me speculating. And I said that anytime that I saw something that could potentially delay my own, window of time, I would tell you guys, and I wouldn't kind of try to sugarcoat it or anything like that. So yeah, I definitely think that there is a potential for it to be pushed out to December. But really, as I've said before, in December, there's only a short window there because it is the holiday period. I highly doubt that it's going to happen. I feel like the latest date it could happen is before December 20th. I think after that, it's not going to happen until the new year, until like maybe mid to late January or something like that. So I think that if it doesn't happen before then, then yeah, it won't happen this year. But it usually gets scheduled about a month out in advance. They may opt to do a faster kind of scheduling here, but it's usually a month out in advance. So I think by mid-November, we'll probably know for sure. And that's still 2 months away, mind you. So we can still do all the testnet forks. And this is also assuming everything goes well. If any of the testnets have major issues with them, then yeah, it's not happening this year. Like, I can straight up say that. I'm here just assuming that things are going to go well. There's not going to be any major bugs or anything like that on the testnets, and then we should still be good for a December launch there. But honestly, guys, if it happens in December or happens in January or February, I don't think it actually matters that much. People make it out as if it's like a huge deal if it doesn't happen within if it happens a couple months later than it originally did. I don't think so, but I think that the core devs and researchers are definitely all aligned on making it happen in December. I haven't, but there's actually another wrench that kind of might happen as well, and might put there's another thing that might put like a wrench into this, is that EIP that I discussed last week, 7514, the churn limit EIP. I'm now starting to see more people talk about this publicly. I don't know if it was my video that did it. I did tweet at the person who was leading this DApp line, who's an Ethereum core dev. I did tweet at him today and basically said, hey, here's my thoughts on this with the link to my video. And we had a bit of a back and forth. And it seems that people are mostly in agreement with me that this was rushed and that more thought should have been put into it. So this could put a spanner in the works in that essentially this EIP could end up being removed from Dencun, which may delay things. I don't know why it would, but it may delay things. But yeah, we'll have to see. I'll keep monitoring that. I'm not seeing any discussion about it being removed right now. I'm actually going to look and see if they discuss this at the next All Core Devs call at all, because as I said, I really kind of waited. I kind of blame myself for waiting too long to speak up about this. There was only a short period of time for people to speak up about this, but honestly, I waited until it was approved because I didn't think it would get approved for Dencun, but I should have spoken up earlier. So I kind of feel a little bit guilty here, but it's out there. My thoughts are out there. Hopefully people latch onto them and understand what I'm saying. I've had many private conversations with people about this as well, and once I've talked them through it and gotten my point across, they seem to understand where I'm coming from and understand the concerns here that I have, and that they're not technical concerns. It's more about the social concerns here, the potential hit to Ethereum's credible neutrality, and that is the most important to me. And you guys know I'm not one to usually rock the boat with these things. I like to make sure that everything's running smoothly, but when something needs to be said, it needs to be said. And that's why I did my rant the other day about this, and that's why I've tried to be a bit more vocal about it. But I also don't want to be seen as someone kind of rocking the boat for the sake of it. I always try to take a balanced approach and try to criticize things that I think should be criticized, and this is definitely one of those things. So we'll see how that shakes out. But yeah, as I said, I at this point in time, I would say that it's more likely that that Dencun happens in December than November now, just because maybe there's a second order effect here of the Holesky testnet not launching on December 15th, launching 2 weeks later. And also, the testnets haven't been scheduled at all yet, and hasn't been much talk about scheduling the testnets for a hard fork yet. So yeah, we'll see. Maybe it happens in November. Maybe I'm surprised. But for now, I'm going to say December. But we'll move on from that one there. All right, just a shout out here. I've shouted out this newsletter before, but I figured I'd shout it out again. So this is the Rhino review, which is an Ethereum staking newsletter put together here by Armageddon. And you can go check this out. It's on Substack. I'll link it in the YouTube description below. But if you want to keep up with everything happening in the staking ecosystem, I cannot think of a better newsletter than this one. There is so much gold in here, guys. Like, I highly recommend signing up to it. Like, if you want to keep up with anything got to do with staking, you will have a full view of the entire Ethereum staking ecosystem just by reading this newsletter. So I'll link that in the YouTube description below for you to check out. But as I said, this is the 15th edition of this newsletter, so it's been going on for quite a while now, and it's being put together by Armageddon here, who's been doing a lot of great work. He links this in the Daily Gwei Discord channel as well, so if you ever kind of miss it, you'll find it there for sure. But yeah, I mean, just look at how many links are here, guys. This is crazy. I mean, I for sure do not get to cover most of this stuff on the refuel. I try to obviously stick to things that I can fit into the 30-minute time slot, but all of this could easily take you hours upon hours to read through, to digest, to understand. And this is just the staking ecosystem of Ethereum, right? This is just only one part of the Ethereum ecosystem when you really think about it. So this is why I always go on about the fact that I think that the Ethereum ecosystem is just like way beyond where I can keep up with it now in terms of one person keeping up with everything happening. But even like a team trying to keep up with everything happening, it's impossible. You have staking, you have layer 2s, you have DeFi, you have NFTs, you have social apps now with like FriendTech leading the charge there, and Farcaster and Lens and all that sorts of stuff there. You have real world assets coming into this. You have all the TradFi and how they're getting integrated with it. There's just too much happening, and I'm going to do my best, as I usually do on the refuel, to try and keep up with all the most interesting things. But if you want to dive deeper, you have to go into the specialized kind of news aggregators, and that's exactly what this newsletter is here. It's a specialized aggregator for everything happening in the staking ecosystem. So I'll link this in the YouTube description below, and you can subscribe to it yourself. All right, so EigenLabs is gearing up to launch their data availability solution soon. So you guys know I've talked about this a lot on the refuel. This is the EigenDA solution that is going to be used by a bunch of projects actually at launch, such as Celo, Mantle, Fluent, Offshore, and Layer N. And this is obviously to use EigenDA because Ethereum Layer 1 data availability is still probably going to be too expensive for their needs, and that means they're not technically a roll-up, these layer 2s. They are like more of a Validium construction where they obviously store their data off-chain instead of on Ethereum, but really it's a cost-benefit analysis for these teams, right? Because it depends on what you're trying to do. Like, for example, Layer N is trying to build the best, I guess, like DeFi exchange on an Ethereum L2, and you can't do that as cheaply as a roll-up as you can as a Validium, at least not yet. Not until maybe we have full dank sharding, which is probably another 2-3 years out or something like that. So the interim solution would be to store your data on EigenDA and then store your proofs on Ethereum, and you can still get those nice security properties and security guarantees but it's lesser than a full roll-up. And that's just the trade-off that these teams can make here. But as I said before, because EigenDA is going to be secured by restaked ETH, it to me is the most secure data availability solution out there, out of the box, really, from that perspective. Now, of course, there's going to be risks of bugs because it's going to be very new, and there's going to be other things in place like centralized controls, but that's going to be true for every other data availability solution as well, such as Celestia and Avail, and I think there's one more out there that's pretty prominent right now. So when looking at it from that lens, yeah, I do think a lot of projects are going to opt for EigenDA here. And you guys know I'm an investor in EigenLabs, just to disclose that there. I forgot to disclose that earlier, but I've been talking about it for so long now. Like I'm definitely just talking about it because I'm super interested in it, but yeah, so they're gearing up to launch soon. I don't know. Yes, so soon means by the end of 2023. So again, this falls into the same things I think about when I think about the Dencun launch, where a lot of teams aren't going to launch anything over the holiday period because they're on holidays, right? So the latest this could happen is probably sometime in like early to mid December here. But I also think that it could happen earlier than that. It just depends on when they're ready to launch it here. But and there's still a cap, by the way, on the restaking too. They haven't raised that cap again, but maybe they raise it one more time and then they launch EigenDA. I don't know. It remains to be seen. We'll have to see how that shakes out there. But that was an article from the block that kind of put this out here, so you can go check that out. I'll link it in the YouTube description below for you to do so. All right, so I've got a few minutes left here to just go back to my earlier discussion about that churn limit EIP. There wasn't one other thing I wanted to say about that. And it was really about that Ethereum's credible neutrality point, because some people have asked me what I actually mean by that, like in a detailed fashion. I don't have all the time in the world to go through that right now, but I will give a bit of a more detailed, I guess, like explanation of what I mean by this. So what I mean by this is that there is a certain social contract in place for the Ethereum network, right? And specifically around Ethereum governance. And that social contract is basically that it's not easy to get an EIP into the network unless it's like a strictly technical thing. Because I remember I mentioned last week there was also another EIP that got pushed through really quickly that had to do with 4844 and blobs and danksharding. But that was a strictly technical thing for a new feature. It wasn't altering something that already existed on the chain. So because it was a strictly technical thing for a new feature that isn't live on the network yet, I think that from that perspective, it doesn't really play into the social contract, right? But when you talk about something like the churn limit EIP, it alters the social contract that has already existed for years at this point. The churn limit, since the Beacon chain went live on December 1st, 2020, that's how long it has been operating under the same behavior. Now, within a few weeks, that behavior has, it hasn't changed yet, but, the EIP went through to change that behavior. So that's what I mean by Ethereum's credible neutrality taking a hit here, because if it can happen in this EIP, what's to say it's not going to happen with other EIPs? And that's why I pushed back, because I'm like, you know what? I don't want this to become a trend. I don't think this is the way Ethereum governance should be operating. I think it's a potentially dangerous trend that, if taken to its logical conclusion, erodes Ethereum's credible neutrality, which in my eyes is its most valuable feature. Now, as I said last week, I don't think that it's a massive hit, right? As I said, it's basically a kind of a dent, essentially. But we all know what happens as you get more and more dents, right? Say you have a car, you have one dent on it, you're like, okay, whatever. But then over time, you get more and more, and it adds up, right? Your car starts looking like it's like shit, really, for lack of a better term, right? So the same thing happens with Ethereum. You ding credible neutrality here, you ding it there, and then before you know it, there's just holes everywhere, right? And or dents everywhere, to continue on with the analogy. So that's why I'm pushing back on it, and that's why I said that I feel like Ethereum's credible neutrality took a little bit of a hit here. But as I mentioned before, there's still time for this EIP to be withdrawn, and honestly, if it was withdrawn due to community pushback, I would be really happy about that, and that would actually strengthen Ethereum's credible neutrality in my eyes, because it means that the community can still have this kind of veto power, I guess. But at the same time, I'm not pushing for it too hard, because it's not something that I think is so the EIP itself, I think, is actually, at the end of the day, probably prudent to put in because it's erring on the side of caution. as I've said, I just don't agree with the speed and the reasoning behind it, and the reasoning fell into the speed. You know, if the reasoning was given on a longer time frame, it would have been different. But the reasoning inferred the speed, which inferred how quickly it got included into Dencun, which is kind of my main issue there. But at the end of the day, if it goes in, I'm not going to think it's a huge issue, but I'm also not pushing too hard about it to veto it. If I thought it was like a critical thing that shouldn't go into the network at all, I'd be on Twitter and other channels every single day telling everyone to rise up basically and say, we don't want this EIP. You know, this is not something we want in the network. We want to veto it, and basically threaten not to run the network upgrade, right? Use our community power. But for this one, I'm happy being mild about it. I'm happy being kind of like quiet about it and doing my own kind of chipping away sort of thing, my own denting of the thing here. And if it's successful in making the core devs think harder about what they've done here, and harder about this EIP in particular, and whether it's actually critically needed, and whether they think we can wait till Electra to get it included instead of including it in Dencun, then I would feel like my job is done. But honestly, I'm pretty happy to just see more people talking about it, because that was my whole goal to begin with. But yeah, that's my whole explanation about why I think that it does have a little bit of a hit to Ethereum's credible neutrality. Not a major thing, but still something to pay attention to. But yeah, anyway, on that note, I'm going to end today's episode there. So thank everyone for listening and watching. Be sure to subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet. Give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the newsletter, join the Discord channel, and I'll catch you all tomorrow. Thanks, everyone.